Welcome to Art in the Raw, the podcast that explores the bold, unapologetic, and often unseen art of queer creators. I'm your host, David Smith. Each episode, we sit down with queer artists from different disciplines to explore their inspirations, their struggles, and the narratives that shape their work. Welcome back to Art in the Raw. I'm your host, David Smith, and today's guest is someone whose work has left an indelible mark on homoerotic art for decades. Rob Clarke is an artist who's been crafting evocative, playful, and sometimes subversive queer imagery since the early 90s. His work spans traditional illustration, digital art, and world building, most notably through his creation of Scoot, a fantastical and thought-provoking exploration of power, play, and companionship. For those unfamiliar, Scoot is Rob's original human dog character born from his desire for a canine companion without the responsibility of actually owning one. First introduced in 2011, Scoot evolved through different artistic styles, from bold pen and ink line work with digital color to later black and white renderings in pencil and charcoal. Over the years, Scoot has become a recognizable and beloved figure, capturing the intersection of fantasy, humor, and kink in Rob's signature style. Throughout our conversation, Rob opens up about the artistic evolution, the impact of digital media, and how AI is shaking the very foundations of image creation. We also discuss the humor, darkness, and deeply personal narratives that shape his work, as well as his own journey in the queer art world. Be sure to check out more of his work at robclarke.net. That's ROBCLARKE.net. So if you're fascinated by art that challenges norms and dives headfirst into the raw, unfiltered corners of queer creativity, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Tell me a little bit first about Rob Clarke. Who's Rob Clarke?
Who's Rob Clarke? Well, I'm an artist. I've been making kind of a homoerotic art for many decades now. Since the early 90s, I went to grad school, and that's where I started making art about kind of my sexuality thing. So I've been doing that since, I guess, 1990. So that's kind of a long time. But, I've been many things over the years. I've illustrated for magazines, and I've done posters for gay events. And I've tried, I've worked in a lot of different mediums. So usually it's drawing. I mean, in the 90s, I was working in kind of traditional medium, like drawing, drawing on paper and painting. And then over the past 20 years, I've been working digitally. So, yeah.
Okay. So looking at your website and your Instagram, your socials, and the history of your art, it's evolved significantly over time, as you mentioned, from the early 90s when you got started to kind of the dynamic Scoot that you've kind of become famous for more recently. How do you think your artistic styles changed through that journey?
Well, it's been more of an evolution. I think, it's just the change of the mediums. Like there's working digitally kind of was the advantage of working digitally is you can make edits to things and revise things, but on the other hand, that's also kind of a flaw too.
You can't commit to what you've done when you can just easily go and click undo.
I've been going through some of my older drawings and kind of thinking there's a certain charm in drawing on paper. I mean, I tried to draw from life regularly too, so I haven't totally abandoned paper. And also in the last couple of years, to be honest, this kind of AI revolution of things has kind of like really freaked me out. I'm sure it's as many image creators and that, it's sort of like almost like, especially things that I was doing around the early dozens, I was going for this really kind of polished, airbrushed, realistic style. Right now, I feel like AI has totally made that kind of seem pointless. Like, what's the point of trying to do something that looks really airbrushed and photorealistic when you can just tell a machine and give it some examples and it can spit out endless variations?
Yeah, it's amazing what it can do nowadays.
Yeah. I mean, I think the whole world's freaked out, not just in visual arts and everything, in so many
Yeah.
professions. I
Editorial,
kind of,
writing,
yeah,
office.
music, voice acting. I don't know. It's head spinning. It's kind of terrifying. And but I also feel like being against it too is like trying to hold back the tide with a broom.
That's true.
Yeah.
So you mentioned kind of taking inspiration from your personal experiences and everyday life, and I know you mentioned taking inspiration from pop culture for some of the art that you do. Um, how does your everyday life influence your process of how you create art?
Well, I have to say I live the most boring, ordinary life.
Oh, I doubt that's true.
People are invariably disappointed when they meet me because they think I'm like some like S&M master, but I'm kind of like lead a very kind of ordinary life. I guess to me, I just feel like being an artist. I feel like you're living on the edge, and there's
Mhm.
always like a question of how can I keep doing it's like having two jobs. And so the things that bring stability to my life, like, like having a roof over my head and food and that kind of like really, to me, they enable me to make my art. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's like it's like having two jobs.
Do you try to channel that into your art?
What the
The
domesticity or
what's the struggles of everyday life and trying to meet those needs, or do you try to kind of create a fantasy to escape that?
well, I guess with like that's the Scoots series, which I worked on for like I've gone through I think three solid periods of my life where that was the focus, and I worked
Mhm.
exclusive, kind of trying to create this kind of world, and I kind of like thought that trying to do this world building, and I think to me there's like this the world I created with that was trying to create like an ordinary world where you're just have this kind of pet companion dog that happens to be a man. So that was sort of like there's like a kind of an ordinariness to the routine of that. I guess I was just talking to somebody about this, and it's sort of like with the dog, it's a perfect companion because you know what it's thinking. It's like with even the closest people, you never really know what they're thinking. You can have like
Yeah.
your best friend or person you're living with or your husband and that, and they'll say something and say, "Who the fuck are you? Where did that come from? I don't know you at all." So I think essentially the thing about having why I'm attracted to like the dog, the kind of the idea of the dog slave puppy boy thing is just having like the perfect companion of there's none of the anxiety that you have in real life there.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the ordinariness a minute ago because I feel like the scoop piece specifically, there is kind of an ordinary everyday life aspect to the situations that you put Scoot in, but there's also this fantastic fantasy aspect of it because it's Scoot is a man. So you can kind of balance between just an ordinary everyday, what's a dog doing out in the backyard versus the difference of it being an actual person is Scoot.
Yeah.
How do you
Well,
when you come up to a project like you building this world of Scoot, you've built this other world of what was it called? It was like the Big Top and the Animal Farm. When you approach creating a world like that, what's the first thing you think about when you're trying to create that world in terms of character development and style?
well, I've always, ever since I was a kid, I've always looked at men as being strange creatures. I think that's a
Mhm.
very common thing for like the young gay boys is to not really identify with your own sex. That like like the when you're in second grade and other boys are playing ball and you just I just could not relate to that.
Yeah.
you know, like, or sports or stuff like that. I mean, I'm pretty, you know, cisgendered, but you know, yeah, even then, I always felt the male being male was something kind of alien to me. So, you know, in the spectrum of like, you know, masculine to feminine, being gay like me, it's sort of like being kind of center center male, you know, so kind of being shifted towards the center.
So how do you think humor plays in your art? Because there's a lot of things that I see in your Scoot art that can be kind of humorous, especially your animated versions of Scoot. How does humor function in your art? How do you add that?
Well, I think a lot of my fantasies are all about kind of sadistic, you know, kind of about
Uh-huh.
power. You know, there's a pleasure in wielding power and a pleasure of submitting to power. And I find, you know, with humor sort of tempers it. It sort of makes fun of my own sadistic impulses. I hope it's like a spoonful of sugar or something makes the.
Go down.
I hope I kind of feel like I'm laughing at myself a little bit, my evil fantasies. Because you know, if I were like really, you know, really sadistic, I don't know, it might be that may be too far on the dark side for me. Uh,
Interesting. I'm wondering how that might play out in your art if you were to go down the darker the darker side to express that in your art, or that's something that Scoot would ever do.
well, you know, there's always like a thread of I have this constant thread of the dogs and the Scudiverse always being afraid of being the dog catcher or being caught by the balls or being taken to the vet and that's like kind of like a you know that's very dark. That's a very dark thing. But I kind of find the thread of it trying to to be humorous. It's also like things like you know you know there's a lot of farting and like show turds and that's sort of like but my attitude towards that is kind of like a very adolescent, you know, kind of like the way a kid laughs at a fart joke. So, you know, I mean, I get like
So
people
very
that are
male.
really, yeah, yeah, yeah. So, you know, I get people that really are into these things like castration and scat, and they it's like can go too far to me. There's kind of a cutoff line where it doesn't, where there's, I like it when it's kind of humorous.
Yeah, it keeps a playfulness to it.
Yeah.
Um, so what extent does your personal experiences with or kink influences influence the art you create? Or do you draw it from the kinks of others? I mean, where does
Um,
that kind of is that more you or is that more observation of others? Or is that too
Well, like
personal?
I'm, you know, I'm like 60 years old now, so like my prime like youth era was right smack dab when AIDS was around. That was like what a fucking nightmare.
Yeah.
You know, like I remember in 1982, I think I just graduated from high school, and then you would read in the paper how there was like, you know, this disease that was happening in faraway New York and San Francisco, and then within a couple of years, it was seemed to be everywhere. You know, and these were like the formative sex years. You're so it was to me there was always kind of this feeling like I was playing in a minefield. So I mean, I know you know being you know my being sex positive, you know, is trying to be away, trying to be sex positive in that environment is kind of an amazing thing.
No,
So
agreed.
yeah, so you know, I think in the early '90s when I was in grad school, there was like a whole kind of idea of like talking about your fantasies and talking about things, and I think that was kind of the spirit of the time there, like exploring your fetishes and also trying to be safe too. Yeah, and then I think another big event was the invention of the internet. So in the like 90s, that's when I was kind of really exploring like all the kind of childish fantasies I had when I was like a kid, seeing as men as dogs, men as horses, men as clowns, things like that you wouldn't find in men. The primary medium was magazines, and you wouldn't find stuff
Hmm.
like that. You know, that was pretty
No, you wouldn't.
rarefied, very niche. You know, and I think it was like I think around actually around you know 2000 where the things like instant messaging became a thing. That's where I really
Mhm.
started connecting with people and sticking your finger sticking my finger in people's brains and collaborating and in some ways I felt, if you went to a gay bar in the 90s or 80s, you wouldn't be talking about like being a diaper boy or
Yep.
that. I went to very kinky places, but it's like that's just not something that was out there that much. There was,
No, it wasn't.
yeah. So
I think
there's
the
like
internet
this
has
really,
done a great job of kind of fueling that aspect that of our culture that maybe has always kind of been there, but has never had a way to express itself until the internet gave us that. Um, and so you mentioned, some of those different communities that we have. The puppy play community, in particular in the queer world, has its own kind of unique culture, its aesthetic that kind of aligns with what you were saying, where before, you never did see that in the 80s or 90s, but now it's very proliferate. And um, I think your art resonates, especially Scoot, with that community. How do you see the influence of that community reflected in your art? How do you think your art resonates or influences that community?
I really don't know because this is something that was really important to me, like in the 90s. And I just see it, it was something that it never existed. And then now it's like a whole, it really is like a whole community, a whole world that, I feel kind of also kind of aged out of participating in these things, being like, being a
Oh,
60-year-old pup doesn't work, I don't think.
not at
So
all.
so
You wouldn't.
okay, but I like kind of being like the ringleader and the master and being the the puppeteer. Like I really do like sticking my finger in people's brains. So that kind of makes me feel powerful
Do you think
and
some
gives me,
aspects of
yeah.
that community kind of maybe as it evolves and becomes more popular, do you think that alters how you evolve things with Scoot, the way you portray Scoot? Does that influence Scoot in any way?
Well, I think I really don't know. I kind of was I haven't been able. I'm actually kind of the phase. I worked for like an entire year just working on skewed images, and I'm kind of like we're trying to earn some money now. So I just find it hard to. It is. It's like having two jobs. So I kind of put Scoot on the back burner, but I do like. I intend to go back to him and spend some time, and I kind of like the idea of putting me in the picture more like being Scoot's master, sort of like,
Hmm.
like who is Scoot's master? Who are the other dogs' masters, and like what the world is. But I kind of like the thought of Scoot's master being like a retired beautician or a hairdresser or something. So that's sort of like kind of flushing. I've been into like I think I might start adding myself into the mix.
Yeah, I noticed on your Instagram that of late you've got more and more of yourself in your art that you're doing. How does that inform how your art has changed?
Well, I've been doing that like for about 7 months now. I've been
Wow.
using myself in because I've been looking for work, and I can't really show my as much as I would love to just show my really kinky stuff. I kind
Yeah.
of needed to do something that was kind of non-sexual, G-rated, but I can't. I thought maybe I could do it about myself and who I am, and maybe that could, there's some artistic merit to that I can that's not too out of the loop of what everything else I've done. So, but yeah, no, I kind of wanted to make it about me. On Insta and also on Instagram. Instagram is for like a general audience. I just,
Yeah.
I don't want to get kicked off Instagram, and there's places
No.
where I fly my
There's plenty of
flag.
that happening nowadays.
Yeah, so I just no, I think with these latest videos on my YouTube channel too is like just it's kind of about me, kind of what trying to who am I, and
Hmm.
it was all I think on LinkedIn that you're supposed to put an avatar in that, and I thought I'm looking at pictures of myself, I was just like horrified. So I thought,
Oh
well, I
no.
could, I'm an image creator, so I can just like
Create an
I can
image.
create my own image. So this is who I am. Ta-da!
How do you navigate that tension between creating art that is kind of deeply personal to you, um, and your identity, and making art that resonates with a broader audience, especially an audience that might be outside of the queer community? How do you navigate that tension?
Well, I've always known that I'm like kind of like a. I'm never going to be like a Picasso, you know. I'm never. I just and most gay men I just can't relate to. So I just sort of make things up. Really, I try to be true to myself, you know. And I hope if somebody if resonates with someone else, it's like. Yeah, there's been times when I tried to make like homoerotic art that I thought was going to be like more for a general audience, and it was just
Mhm.
kind of felt really not pleasing me and not pleasing anyone else. So, you know, I just try and have my own like party and see if anyone comes.
Do you think that your art attracts a non-queer kinky audience?
You know, I kind of sometimes I would when I do get straight men sometimes that like you know like they're into like ball busting. You know, I've done like this. It does like this kind of nice. Like I think I'm you know scenarios about power. You know, men submitting to power and that does appeal to other people. So yeah, no, I mean and lots of gay men just are like don't really they're not into it. So you know, just trying to please, trying to. That's why I'm so wildly successful. But
How do
no,
you
I
think?
kind of.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I was going to say, how do you think queer artists are kind of challenging that dominant narrative in art? There's a tension nowadays around, um, uh, especially young men, and challenges of masculinity with younger men, the Gen Z, and younger. How do you think queer artists can approach that in their art and provide those younger men a sense of what being masculine can be?
I really don't know. I think that's above my pay grade. No, we're just in such a fucking weird time right now.
We
I don't
are,
know
aren't we?
what just you know political climate and also just the AI thing is like really not to keep harping about that. To me, that's just something in the back of my mind I'm always thinking about. Why bother doing anything? You know, like if if I were young now, if I were a kid now, why learn to draw? What's the point? You know, it's almost like if you could just yeah, I would like to see something when I was a kid and see like Frank Frazetta and say, I want to draw like that. I want
Oh,
to learn that, right? No, but with a kid seeing something like that, say, I draw this in the style of Frank Frazetta. You know, that's
yeah. I loved his art when as a teenager in the he's I think I really his art really resonated me as a growing gay man. I didn't know that I realized I was gay as a teenager, but there was something about his art that I really connected with.
oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, I remember, you know, his like, oh no, it wasn't him. It was Boris Vian or the guy that did the
But the fantasy,
gore. Yeah,
yeah,
like he did like I think the Gore series paperback. I think it's Boris Viejo.
Viejo, yeah,
Yeah, he did, and I remember, you know, he did all these like kind of like you know barbarian guys and like little loincloths and that. I
yep.
just remember going into the public library and looking at the covers of the paperbacks and that kind of blowing my mind. But you know, that was like, you know, we're talking about things like and that would be the late '70s, I think, when
Mhm.
that was, and how I don't know, like really nowadays kids with their phones, you know, you can look up anything,
That's true.
but you know, we were
I'm
living in a much
hopeful that
less.
the new generation, the younger generation, is has a growing interest in more analog forms of art. Film photography is a growing thing in popularity with younger generations of photographers versus digital because they like that tangible physical approach to having something film and making a physical print. So I'm hopeful that the newer generations will see digital and AI for what it is and realize that there's something more to be had from maybe an older physical style of art. It just brings something to your soul that I don't think digital does. Looking ahead, what do you think you're envisioning in the future for your art? Where is your art going?
The mental institution or the poorhouse. I don't know. I just always like, I think truly the thing that makes me happiest in my life is when I got like some little art, some working on some art thing.
Yeah.
It really kind of makes me, there's been periods where I've had to work and, when I have a real job in that, even if it's an interesting job, at some point I get really weird and start muttering to myself and I get really depressed and bitter. So no, when I'm working on one of my art projects, working out my kinks and showing the world my freak flag, that's sort of like kind of makes, because honestly, like really when somebody says they connect with an image of mine, something I made, and particularly some of the weirder things or that really means I feel like I've made like an intense personal connection between one brain and another. So
I'm sorry, go ahead and finish.
oh well, no, I'm working more on my trying to work on some of these self-portrait, incorporating my own image, so they're not really sexual. But I've been mulling in my mind going back into the scoot world, and we're kind of fleshing out more of making more elaborate scenarios of him. Like, I guess I like the idea of building on things, and so I've kind of like working on something intensely, stepping away from it, looking at it with fresh eyes and going, oh, this works. What was I thinking here? That I must have been out of my mind, or I dismissed that back then, but this might be kind of interesting. So, kind of stepping back and going back into things is good. The problem with the scoot things, I love doing the animations and the narrations and the stories and that, but there's just very few places that I can show this stuff. So that's like
those skills into more mainstream
oh
art.
yeah, that's trying to like I kind of like trying to have like this symbiosis even when I'm working on some shitty job, that I'm like kind of learning something, like some skill, like some piece of software or some technique. Yeah.
And one last question. So Salon Natural does, my focus is to advocate for queer artists and get visibility for queer artists. But the other part of Salon is naturists. We meet periodically in nudist environments and create art together. Would you consider yourself a nudist or a naturist or?
I mean, I have, and not in the last like 5 years or so. Before COVID, I was like kind of a, I think when I was like young, when I was like in my 30s, I was like 20s and 30s, I was like really shy. But when I hit 40, it's like, whoa,
Something
something
about 40, you're like, I don't care. I'm just going to do what I want.
yeah. So I mean, COVID kind of like put like I know it was giving me an excuse for being a recluse and a hermit. So maybe I'm ready to come out of my shell.
Well, thank you for the time today. I really appreciate you
Oh
taking
well,
the time
thank
out for
you.
this interview.
It's doesn't happen often that I get a chance to talk about my favorite subject, myself and my art.
Agreed.